Support for this program is provided by
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Henderson, and welcome to our American Black Journal and BridgeDetroit Town Hall on reparations for African Americans. Thanks for taking a break in the middle of a busy workday to join us for this really important conversation. Over the next hour, we're going to check in on the status of the Detroit Reparations Task Force that's working to come up with recommendations to address historical discrimination against Black Detroiters. And we're going to talk about the in-depth research that's underway at the University of Michigan to identify those past harms. We'll also talk about similar reparations efforts in other cities. Yes, this is something that is happening all over the country. The momentum behind the idea that we have to make right what we got wrong in the past is maybe at an all-time high. Remember, if you have a question for any of our guests, you can submit it in the comment section here, and we will get to it during the hour. So let's get started by hearing what some Detroiters think about the idea of reparations. BridgeDetroit reporter Malachi Barrett got a random sampling of opinions. Take a look.
It has been a conversation for a very long time. I just don't know how they'll be able to do it so that it's equitable. I think it's a great idea. I just don't know how the reality can come to pass.
Reparations means justice, really. It's a matter of helping people who were excluded or oppressed or underadvantaged in the past and whose families have consequently and subsequently been disadvantaged, and trying to make up for those disadvantages that were caused. I mean, they weren't accidental, they were caused.
Reparations, to me, is the wealth that we've created in this country being paid to us.
I guess being one of the younger generations, it doesn't really mean that much. I guess it does seem like begging. I'm not going to lie. I'm very uncomfortable with the sentiment of having to receive reparations.
What form do you think reparations really should take?
That's tough. You know, reparations is tough. I think when you think about the debt that the majority of our community is in, the majority of Black people are in, I think wiping that could be an interesting approach.
So some of the homes in Detroit are very dilapidated or run down. You have to change people's thought pattern, their mindset. It's the old saying in the Bible, if you give me a fish, I'll eat for one day. If you teach me how to fish, I can eat for a lifetime. So if you just give me a house, but you haven't taught me about finances, you haven't educated me how to take care of it, it just repeats itself generation after generation. Yes, a down payment was good, but what do I do to keep it? What do I do to teach generations behind me about home ownership?
What's interesting about this local task force is they're looking at specifically things that the city of Detroit has done to harm Black communities. Can you think of any examples that?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is the wiping out of Black Bottom, the entire African American community that was here and was thriving and was culturally vital, just bulldozing it.
You know, we've been talking about this for decades now at the federal level, which is part of why cities are taking it on. But why do you think it's taken so long to actually do anything about this?
I think it's taken a long time for any action to be put to this. It's just because I think that people don't prioritize reparations, especially towards people of color.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
To be, I mean, black people be asking for a share of the, I should say, piece of the pie for a long period of time, and I don't think it ain't going to happen another couple more years.
People, I think, are just like hesitant to get their hopes up about it.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like the best thing to do is just like a lot of talking has been done for years and years and years about this. I feel like we need to stop with the talking and we should just start with action.
Okay, so a little history before we get started with the conversations here. And I want to thank Malachi Barrett of BridgeDetroit for the work he did getting those wide range of opinions from Detroiters about this. We're going to hear a little more from Malachi in a little bit. But let's go back to 2021. When, as Detroiters, we went to the polls and saw a ballot initiative on the ballot to decide whether we wanted to explore the idea of reparations. We passed that initiative by 80%. So it wasn't even close. And so this task force was established after that. That 13-member group was created early last year, and it has been working since then to try to figure out what reparations could look like, how we tally the things that were done wrong to African Americans in this community, and how we move forward. Joining me now to talk about the work that this task force has been doing are the co-chairs of it, Keith Williams and Sydney Calloway. Welcome, Keith and Sydney, to our town hall.
Good afternoon.
How you doing?
It's great to see both of you. Keith, I'm going to start with you. You and I have had several conversations about this task force since it started. Like I said, you guys started out last year. We're a year or more into this now. Catch us up. Where are we with the monumental effort, really, that you guys have to undertake to just start figuring out what the scope of this issue is?
You know, I'm going to start it like this. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Last year, when me and you talked, we was going through some difficult periods, but I think we're now on track. When Robert Wu Simmons came to Detroit last year, yeah, we were trying to find our way, but Robin got us on track about where do we need to go, and that was like to start with a harms report. Then after that, we got involved with University of Michigan, and University of Michigan was doing the harm report, and then after that, with my relationship with the regional aspect of Robert Wu Simmons' municipal reparations. I met Linda Mance some years ago, and she came in and she did the what we call the impact report. You got the harm report and the impact report, and so you know we're really trying to get on track to get this report done by October. Sydney's been really doing a fabulous job doing in the inner workings of it. I'm just looking at the big picture, and Sydney can elaborate a little bit more on the internal aspect of it, but I think we're well on our way to getting this report done.
So before I get to Sydney, Keith, what happens after October? Let's say it's November 2024. What should Detroiters expect will be happening at that point?
Well, our focus should be on what the ballot initiative stated, make recommendations on housing and economic development. When this report is all said and done, it should have met those criteria. Yes, we added some other stuff to it because the cultural aspect was destroyed during those years from 1929 to up until when Motown left. Then you got to look at the healthcare aspect. I told Daphne this yesterday. My brother died in 1961 in our house because he didn't have proper health care. He died of measles and pneumonia. And we couldn't get access to the proper health care professionals to help us with that situation. Just imagine all the family surrounded with your dad, mom, and the baby's is held in your mother's arms, and he's dying in front of us. And then I can go back to 1960, as my father told me, 4 of his sisters died in a house in Hamtramck because of tuberculosis. So you got to add all those things and come up with a comprehensive report that's going to be sellable. Got to be able to sell this to all the people, because you got skeptics out here that, it's a handout, as you heard in the previous interview, but we got to make it that can't be too far to the left or too far to the right. It's got to be pragmatic and sellable to the Detroiters who voted for this.
Yeah. Sydney, this is the first time you and I are talking about this. You're relatively new to the task force. First thing I want to do is give you a chance to introduce yourself, talk a little about your background, and then I want to talk about these housing and economic development programs that are supposed to be providing opportunities for Black Detroiters. But before we get to that, again, let's learn a little more about you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Henderson. My name is Sydney Calloway. I'm a native Detroiter, born and raised here on the West Side. I am a fellow, or I was a former fellow with the Movement for Black Lives 2 times over. So for 2 seasons, I got to learn on a national scale with the Movement for Black Lives. I've been an activist since 2020. And this has been a phenomenal opportunity for a knowledge exchange. There's a lot of wisdom on this task force. There's a lot of history that's being shared, and I'm learning a lot. I never thought that I would be in any type of leadership position. Never thought I'd end up being the co-chair, but very privileged and honored to be with this team, and very excited about this work. It's a historical moment in society, and I feel like this is the climate to finally get something done on a municipal level that'll kind of inspire some federal movement.
Yeah. So let's talk about this goal of recommending housing and economic development programs that would boost opportunities for Black Detroiters. Talk about, Sydney, what you guys have found so far, and especially what you're hearing from the public.
Yeah, so we've been having some really phenomenal internal meetings as of late, and we're starting to work on the outline for our report. So we want to make sure that this report not only goes to City Council, but that it's something that can be consumed by the residents, and make sure that they're informed, they know what type of programs we're working on. We are going to be releasing quite a few surveys over the next couple of months to really engage with our community, to make sure that they have an opportunity to engage and give their input, to make sure that their voices are amplified in this process. We've gotten a report back from Columbia University speaking to quite a few different things that they observed while they were here. It was fantastic to have them here in person, allowing them to visit some of these sites of harm and really put some tangible pieces to the research that they were doing. I'm very excited about the U of M report to come out, but our next internal meeting on July 6th, we really want to center the voices of the residents, give them an opportunity to give us some feedback and to really help drive the way that this work is going to go, because the 13 of us can't do it alone. We're working in a beautiful Black city, and we need to make sure that every voice is amplified. So that's where we're at right now. We're working on our outline for the framework, talking about feasibility, sustainability, not even just for housing and education, affordable quality housing, because we have to insert that word quality there. But we're looking for a holistic approach. So we heard some commentators or some comments saying that, there's a little bit of skepticism, that if they don't have an education piece to it, that it's it feels like it's for naught. It feels like this is all in vain. But we want to make sure that there's some type of mention to some systemic change, some policy change. So we got a lot on our plate, but it's very exciting to get into this work with everyone.
Yeah. Sydney, I want to follow up on this question of things like education versus things like housing. One of the tensions here, I think, is in deciding how to create opportunities long-term versus dealing with kind of short-term symptoms of the lack of opportunity. Can you talk about how you guys are starting to think that through, and whether something like education has to take front and center in order for that long-term change to take place?
Absolutely. So as of right now, Detroit is on a global stage. We just hosted the NFL draft. The Michigan Central event was something that was broadcasted around the world. So in order to make sure that we can compete on that type of level, we have to make sure that our public school system is producing the type of students and type of citizens that can participate in the economy, which would speak to just the education portion in itself. So DPS has gone through a lot. We're really looking into the time under the emergency managers and looking at the laws that allowed that to kind of happen. We're going back and looking at what happened during the bankruptcy. So it's not, when we think of reparations, we immediately go back to slavery and we go back to historical harms. But it was great to have these university partners come in and take a look at the city and the harms that were done to Black residents through a contemporary lens, right? I love using that term, contemporary lens, because the impacts are multi-generational. This work has to be multi-generational. There's no way to repair generations of harm in 18 months, but we can start by educating our children, educating our families. So I want to ensure that this becomes, a household conversation, a kitchen table conversation, because a lot of these things, there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of pieces to it, and it's not one versus the other when it comes to repair, and it's not one versus another when it comes to the types of reparations that we're looking for on a municipal level, on a federal level. It's yes and this and, right? It's all simultaneous because these are all things that impact us at the same time across the board. So education is absolutely that first step. And the more we can exchange those ideas with one another, the more we can start to really evolve our mindset beyond cash payments and beyond just a single house. We can really start thinking about long-term ways to shorten and shrink that wealth gap.
Yeah. So as we've said several times, this is an effort that's going on in Detroit, but it's going on in other cities too. I mean, there's a lot of places that are thinking about this and some that are actually doing it. And in fact, we just saw in Evanston, Illinois, a conservative group file a lawsuit against the city because it has paid out more than $5 million in reparations to Black residents over the past 2 years. Keith, I want to talk about the potential for that kind of backlash and the idea of where we might get the money if we decide that African Americans need monetary reparations here in the city of Detroit. This is a majority Black city, overwhelmingly African American. If taxpayers here are asked to pay that would be us. So I know that's probably a little bit down the road, the way we get into that, but I think it's on people's minds how this might work and whether you can really get to the place of saying, here's a dollar figure, here's what people are owed, and here's where it's going to come from, and not worry about that kind of backlash.
I talked to an attorney yesterday from Evanston who I met 3 years ago, and it all stems, the lawsuits all stems from they getting cash payments. And we have to be careful about that. Our program has got to be comprehensive enough where we can meet the scrutiny of the legal aspect of it. And so, you can't raise taxes on people unless you do it constitutionally. And marijuana is one aspect of it. Land trust is another aspect of it, using TIFs, recapturing those kind of things. So I'm looking at an array of things that can meet the legal test. But we got to be very careful with this because it can cause us some problems. Now it's causing problems in Evanston, and there's groups all across the country that's going to have to look at what's getting ready to happen in Evanston, Illinois. So we have to look at it from a different lens. And that's why I said in my opening that it's got to be pragmatic. When you look at education, we have nothing to do with education because that's a separate entity, but it does affect what we do from an employment standpoint and a growth standpoint in our city. So we got to look at a whole lot of things. When I was out there doing this, banging the doors, you have to go back historically how it all started. Black folks who was here in 1906, they came to work at Packer Mortar. Then you come to the biggest migration was in 29. And then the next migration was government jobs. in 1940, and all the harm was caused out of housing, which is the mainstay of our troubles now. So it's going to be, you got to look at this as a total approach. You got to look at it from several lenses, but it's got to be a point where we can sell it to Detroiters and sell it to the rest of the community and to the state. So I think we are on track, but we need to just stay focused on what the voters voted for: housing and housing and economic development, where all the harm was caused historically. And you think about this, I just talked to somebody Saturday at Jim Jenkins' party, and there's 1,000 homes in the land bank. And most of those houses, you can't do anything with them. So, you know, we're going to have to look at the total inventory of what we got and see how we can repair, because you're going to need grant money from the federal government to help you fix those houses, because they got those houses, but they don't have cash to fix them. So, Steve, like Sydney said, this has got to be a comprehensive approach. How I got in this thing is to change the economics and the housing approach to how we move a new agenda in the city of Detroit. And I use 3 words: repair, heal, and rebuild. We have to repair all the structural things that has caused us to get in this mess. And we got to heal from a spiritual standpoint, because we've been at each other, black and white, black folks against black folks, and it's a sad what's happening to us. But if we don't break the healing portion, then we can't go anywhere. And then we got to rebuild. Once this thing is done, we have to rebuild the community from a healing and a repairing standpoint if we're gonna move forward.
Yeah. Okay, Keith and Sydney, really great to have both of you here. We're going to hear back from you again at the end, but thanks for joining us on our Reparations Town Hall. Okay, up next, the University of Michigan has partnered with the Detroit Reparations Task Force to provide research on reparative justice here in Southeast Michigan. Joining me now is Rita Chin. She's an associate dean at the University of Michigan in the graduate programs there. She brought together university faculty members for this coordinated effort. Rita, welcome to the town hall.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So let's start here. Explain how U of M's partnership with the task force came to be and what some of the goals are.
Okay, well, as many of you probably know, the University of Michigan is a pretty big and unwieldy institution. And so there are actually a number of different units who are participating in this partnership with the task force. Rackham, the graduate school, is one partner, but there are 2 others that I think are worth sort of calling out here. The first is the Center for Social Solutions, which is directed by Dr. Earl Lewis. And that center actually began 3 or 4 years ago already in partnership with Lauren Hood and her Afrofuturism kind of project to think about reparations, specifically in relation to Black Bottom and the prospect of the resurfacing of I-375. So that was a kind of seed. And then as the task force got up and running, Lauren was actually initially one of the co-chairs of the task force. And so she sort of brought the Center for Social Solutions and myself into conversation with the task force, thinking about sort of how we might begin to address some of these research questions, right? Because it's one thing to sort of know the kind of sort of newspaper or media level, have that kind of understanding of the harms that have been done. But in order to actually make a kind of substantive case for reparations, we knew that it was going to be important to have real kind of documentation on a number of fronts. So at the same time, one of the subcommittees for the Detroit Reparations Task Force reached out to another U of M unit, that's Poverty Solutions, and asked them to begin to write a harms report that was focused on housing. And so the 3 U of M units have actually been coordinated in trying to bring together a kind of more holistic, as Keith was talking about and Sydney were talking about, view of what the harms experienced by Black Detroiters have been. And so my role in that was really convening a group of different faculty experts, so political scientists, historians, urban planners, social work experts, public health experts. Now we have someone on the team who is focused on education, public policy, and also climate science, right? Because we found that actually so much of the harm that has been done to Black Detroiters that we typically associate with housing is actually connected to environmental hazards like air quality, flood risk, which can lead to health problems around black mold. And then those impact things like education and how often students miss school because of all of these other kinds of health issues. And so we started to find, as we were kind of unpacking different disciplinary perspectives, that they're very much connected, and that housing is in many ways the kind of spine of the harm. But it seemed important to also tease out all of these other implications, ramifications, consequences, and present those in this harms report to the task force so that they have kind of maximal information, right? And I think the hope is that they will take this report and figure out what their priorities are.
Yeah. The importance of data here is one of the things that kind of leaps out at me from this. And I want to have you talk just a little bit about how you quantify these things. I think that's a real question on people's minds too. How do you determine what a harm is and what impact it has, and put a hard number on something like that, or documentation that proves that it happened and that the intent was to harm, and that the effect was that it harmed African Americans.
Yeah, so the quantification is a really complicated issue because, well, for one thing, in terms of the housing, one of the things that we found very quickly was that home ownership is pretty variable, right? And so there were significant numbers of Black Detroiters who own their homes, and there you can at least put some dollar amounts on the value of the home when it was, destroyed or became uninhabitable, or when folks were required to leave because of these other kinds of urban or federal projects like I-375. But there were a large number of Black Detroiters who didn't own their homes, right? And so one of the things that the researchers have found that's complicated in terms of that kind of quantification is that when you're used to kind of amassing data and putting dollar amounts on home ownership, you leave out a large portion of the story, right? And a large portion of the harm, right? Because just because a family didn't own their home didn't mean that they were any less disrupted or impacted when they were forced to leave, or when their house was infested with black mold and their basement was flooded, et cetera, et cetera. So it's complicated.
Yeah. Talk about some of the things that you have found here, and maybe some surprises even in terms of the reach of this kind of harm. I think many of us can think of historical events and things that have happened that we know were harmful to African Americans, but I always kind of think of the ripple effect of some of these things over time, especially, so that there are things that we might not think of as being directly connected to discrimination and racism, but they really are.
Yeah, so I think one of the more surprising set of findings that we've had came out of bringing in climate scientists, because they're, in some strange way, climate is both everywhere and nowhere. And so we all know that it's a problem, but it's hard to understand like how that has very concrete impacts on folks. So some of the climate scientists and their students looked at things like heat islands. That's something obviously that we've been thinking about just in the last week with the massive heat wave that we've been enduring, but also air quality. So think about the Marathon plant or Stellantis, right? Where those are located in the city of Detroit, and measuring the air quality around them. And those, impacts are again connected to housing, right? And so if you have these 18-wheelers pulling out of factories and, sort of spewing lots of pollution, that has a measurable impact, not just on housing values, but on the health of the residents who are living there. So I think that in some ways, those have been some of the more surprising findings that we've had. The other thing that's a little bit more complicated, part of our task has been to think about what harms have been done by the city, right? But those are quite difficult to disentangle from the harms that have been done by the region or the state or the federal government, right? So that, the building of I-375, of course, was a federal project. And so, I think we have been sort of taking a maximalist approach, but we will eventually have to focus on the city, because that's kind of where the focus of the task force is at the moment. But we have found that there have been some interesting interplays, let's just say, between the city and, for instance, the region, right? So that transportation is a regional authority that has huge impact on the city, but is not actually controlled by the city.
Right.
And so we're starting to see some of those kinds of issues emerging as well, or where some of the surrounding communities around Detroit had things like sunset laws, right? That meant that it was very difficult for Black Detroiters to move out of the city because there were all of these laws that prevented them from moving into proximate neighborhoods. And then one other quick example is that some of the neighboring communities have worked to fix their own flooding issues, but it turns out that the solution has often been to drive the water, not, I think, intentionally, but the effect was that the water was driven into the city of Detroit, right? Yeah. And so they're very, very complicated issues here.
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk just a little, and I know it's not your charge to necessarily come up with the fixes that we might affect here in Detroit, but I wonder if you can talk a little about how you even begin to kind of unspool all of the things that you were just talking about, all of these layers of complication, all of these different actors who came to bear on creating these problems. Do you have guidance for us here in Detroit in terms of just how we start thinking about fixing these things, repairing, restoring, making people whole for the things that they lost?
I mean, I think it's a really tough question, and I feel like the task force has their hands full, right? Because in some ways, that's precisely what the task force was charged with. I think from the research perspective, our goal has been to try to provide as much information as possible, and to then kind of be clear about where the harms were rooted, who the actors were that you could sort of attach to particular harms. And I think that process will help in some ways narrow down the focus a little bit. But I so much agree with both Keith and Sydney on this issue of holistic kind of solutions or ways to approach reparative justice. And I think that will be really important.
Yeah. Okay, Rita Chen, really great to have you here with us for our town hall. We'll hear from you again near the end of the show.
Thank you.
Up next, BridgeDetroit reporter Malachi Barrett has been following really closely the work of this Detroit Reparations Task Force, along with paying attention to efforts in other cities. He's here now to talk more about what he has learned and where we are in the process. Great to see you, Malachi.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah. So, as I said, you've been following the work of this task force from the very beginning. The whole thing got off to a little bit of fits and starts. We're a year in, though. Things seem more focused and perhaps more on time, but I'm really curious about how you assess how things have progressed since you've been there since the beginning.
Yeah, I think for folks that are maybe just hearing about this now or are really interested about in the conversation that we've been having so far, it's actually like a really good time to start tuning in. We are close to getting the U of M report that's been discussed quite a bit today. And that really sets the foundation for the task force to start like tangibly assessing what are the programs that can address, harms that were caused by the city. And, I think the task force is in a much better position now than certainly at the start of the year. We've written a lot about how there was kind of some stops and starts in the first year. There were some resignations of some folks involved. There were some issues with how the meetings were run, but they're at full strength now. The city council has appointed new members to replace those who resigned. It feels like there's a good group of folks who have a lot of expertise in various arenas, kind of a well-rounded group, and they seem to be getting along a little bit better as well. And I'll also highlight that the meetings have become more participatory. There's been a pretty intentional effort in just the last 2 months in particular to have more kind of public feedback centered in these conversations. So, for folks that were maybe wondering how they could get involved or if they, have an opportunity to really shape how this work is going forward, I would say, now is like the perfect time for you to start attending. There's a meeting July 6th that will be very focused around, hearing directly from residents.
Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning of the town hall when we saw your reporting just out on the streets in Detroit, talking to folks about the reparations task force and the idea of reparations. There was a wide range of reactions to it. I want to give you a chance to talk about the things that you heard and the things that you hear when you talk to Detroiters, even at these meetings, and hear what they have to say. Are people starting to tune in to this? Are people really hopeful, I guess, about the potential here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a pretty charged issue, right? I mean, we've been talking about how all-encompassing the concept of reparations is, and in quantifying the scope of the harms caused to Black residents. It's really myriad and touches pretty much every aspect of life in the city, and can even go back to its founding. I think the task force is more focused on things that have happened since the 20s and the Great Migration, when a lot of Detroit's Black population got here. But it's really seems to be a situation of like, the more you kind of dig into this, the more you're going to find. And so I think as a result of that, people have a very complicated view of reparations, particularly the difference between a municipal reparations effort here in the city versus federal reparations initiatives that have been, more, the pressure has been more on Congress and the White House to address impacts of slavery as opposed to more kind of local things that we're looking at here. So when you ask people what does reparations mean? I think that a lot of people can point to really specific examples of harms that were caused and things that should be, debts that need to be repaid by the government. But there's less, I think, optimism or just kind of faith that something will be done about it. Obviously, 80% of voters in Detroit supported this, so people want it to happen. I think there's high expectations, but there's a lot of kind of political, legal, and funding constraints that the task force is going to have to work through. And I think, we've run into a lot of residents who just have been kind of let down by government in general a lot. And so that leaves them kind of a little skeptical about really getting invested in this effort as much as they would, really like to see it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've also been paying attention to what's happening in some other cities that are thinking about this question. And recently we saw Chicago's mayor announce that he is going to order the creation of a reparations task force to examine policies in that city that have harmed African Americans. Give us a sense of what you've learned, Malachi, about how other cities are approaching this, and are there things that we should be looking to in some other places to guide our work here in Detroit?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a really interesting moment in history when it comes to reparations in the United States of America. For a long time, the pressure was put on Congress. Our longtime Detroit Congressman John Conyers had been pushing for a commission at the federal level. Well, in kind of a response to the lack of progress, there are a lot of cities that have begun taking this up, and it really started with Evanston, Illinois, as we've mentioned, the suburb of Chicago. They were the first city to create reparation proposals, really based around its history of racial segregation in housing, which is pretty similar to what we've experienced in Detroit. And so they were kind of the first mover, the first city to really show that this was possible. And we've really seen an explosion of cities and a couple of states around the country creating local task forces to look at, what have their governments been responsible for. A lot of them are in the similar position that Detroit is in. They have a task force assembled. They're starting to partner with researchers to come up with studies that will kind of inform their work, but they haven't necessarily put recommendations out. In a few instances, there have been some proposals put forward, but it's not clear how it will be funded. A California task force had talked about including cash payments, but that ended up being pulled off the table. But some pretty major, New York is working on something, Boston, Knoxville, Tennessee, Philadelphia, all have task forces. Kansas City created a reparations commission last year. They're actually collecting donations. So there's a few different ways that cities are kind of trying to tackle the funding question and the legal constraint question. Evanston used marijuana tax revenue. We're a little bit limited in our ability to do that. We do get a portion of marijuana taxes from the state, but it's really kind of too small of an amount of funding to really, I think, do what we would like to do here. So we have to get kind of creative about that. And I think there will be questions for, the governor of Michigan and state lawmakers about what responsibility the state bears and if they're going to put it forward. But, we're really just seeing a lot of cities travel along a similar path. And I think that creates partnerships too that, the city's Detroit's been working with Evanston, Illinois, and, we're all kind of on the same trajectory here.
Yeah. So I also want to give you a chance to talk about the I-375 project and kind of put it into the context of this, the highway, the construction of the highway, the construction of the neighborhoods near the highway were what wiped out Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, two historically African-American neighborhoods. Now, that's a separate project from the reparations task force, but I think they dovetail in some really important ways. You've been covering that process as well. Give us a sense of where you feel that is headed. We saw the Rethink I-375 coalition come up with 11 recommendations to change what the state transportation agency has decided it wants to do. How does that fit into this overall narrative.
Yeah, when we have talked to residents about, can you give me an example of something the city has done to harm Black communities? Really, there's like two things that are immediately what they say. The first is the overtaxation of residents, which is a more recent example that happened, in the last decade or so. And then folks also bring up the destruction of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley as part of urban renewal programs. And the highway was kind of the end point of that. But really, it's important to remember that those neighborhoods were taken down as kind of an early example of gentrification in the city. Columbia did a very interesting report on some feedback that it gathered from residents and some kind of early looks at particular harms. And they talk about how, in 1943, there was a 2-day riot that started on Belle Isle. It moved through downtown. And after that situation, Mayor Cobo and white residents were really like driven by fear to avoid what they considered like crime and instability in Black neighborhoods. And this led to, urban renewal efforts that had specifically targeted Black neighborhoods. And they were basically under the guise of kind of slum clearance, but they destroyed these really important centers of Black life. So, fast forward, quite a few decades later, MDOT has received money from the federal government to rebuild I-375 and make some changes to the way that interchange connects with downtown. And a lot of folks are seeing this as an opportunity to do something about, to recognize the history or provide some kind of reparative, policy there for families that are connected to those neighborhoods. And a lot of people are still alive who this was not that long ago. There's a very fresh memory of residents on that. It's not really clear what they are going to do necessarily. And I think what's interesting when it comes to the destruction of neighborhoods, you can compensate people for the loss of property and the loss of kind of economic opportunity. But how do you restore the culture and the community that was there? I think it'll be interesting to see how reparations can kind of address the removal of those neighborhoods, because they've been kind of replaced with new neighborhoods. But I think that is very present in the minds of a lot of residents as something that should be addressed as,
Yeah. I want to also have you talk just a little, Malachi, about Reverend Joanne Watson and the influence she had over all of this. We lost her in the middle of this process. Talk about how we recover from that.
Yeah, I mean, that was her death last year. Man, it's kind of hard to quantify, honestly, how big of a blow that was for folks. She was a very integral voice in the reparations movement, long before this task force was created. She was a strong advocate on the city council for passing an ordinance that required businesses to disclose if they had any kind of financial connection to the slave trade. This was in the 2000s. So, kind of ahead of its time a little bit. She was also very instrumental in working with Raymond Jenkins and John Conyers to advance reparations work at the federal level. And she, I remember the first press conference that the task force had when it was first assembled. She got on the mic and spoke for 7 minutes straight, just listing example after example after example of things that needed to be repaired. And she had kind of a clear, roadmap. She was a very strong voice in that. So, I mean, I think the task force has done a good job of selecting community leaders and people with, a long history of activism in this space. I don't want to leave anybody out, but you can look at some of the folks that have been selected for the task force, and I think they have a very similar kind of dedication to the cause. But her death last year, I think, really was a key factor in the kind of slow progress that they were able to make, in the wake of that.
Okay, Malachi Barrett, reporter at BridgeDetroit. Thanks for all that you're doing to keep track of not just the Reparations Task Force, but also the I-375 project. And thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, I want to welcome back the rest of our guests for these final minutes. We're going to try to answer some questions. Keith Williams, Sydney Calloway, and Rita Chin, welcome back to the conversation. And also remember, if you want to put questions to the guests, put them in the comments. We've got one here from Maya. She says, how can Detroiters use arts and technology to support the reparations movement? That's a really interesting question. Who wants to field that one?
I guess I can go ahead and take that. As a graduate of the Detroit School of Arts, the arts to Black people in general, it speaks to the culture of the city of Detroit. So the way that we continue to tell our story, to tell our history, and to share wisdom and knowledge is absolutely through the arts. So oral history is a huge part of that, and that can also speak to how it is an art form to tell a story, to make sure that you're connecting with your residents and with your community members, with your neighbors. So that's pretty much the art and culture side of it. When it comes to technology, I think there's a lot of things that have to be kind of considered, right? When we're talking about the way technology kind of infiltrates our lives and the way that it impacts our lives. So I know something that one of my friends discussed quite a bit, and he might be a pioneer in the industry, is the digital divide that we experience here in the city of Detroit. There are a lot of us who were experiencing this blackout type thing during 2020, when a lot of our students were sent home and had to, do schooling online. And that kind of brought to the forefront, or kind of lifted up, the fact that a lot of people don't have access to these technologies. A lot of people don't know how to use technology. A lot of people don't have access to broadband and Wi-Fi, which kind of separates them from global information and the knowledge that they have and can share with people, the knowledge they receive, which is why it goes back to, speaking to Detroit being a global city, we have to make sure that we start implementing this regular use of technology in our everyday lives, and making sure that it's accessible and available for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, that is about all the time we have. I want to thank our panelists, Keith Williams, Sydney Calloway, Rita Chin, and Malachi Barrett, for being here with us on this town hall. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Okay, that is going to do it for this American Black Journal and Bridge Detroit Town Hall on Making Amends, the Quest for Reparations. We really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Tell us what you thought about today's event by taking a short survey in the comments section, and look for our continuing coverage of reparations on American Black Journal and Detroit PBS, as well as in Bridge Detroit. I'm Stephen Henderson. Take care.
Support for this program is provided by